Dr. Andrew Smith is an associate professor of marketing at Sawyer Business School of Suffolk University. Recently, Dr. Smith published a study in Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science, which is considered one of the most prestigious academic journals in the business field. Now, let's know more about Dr. Smith and his study. So, Dr. Smith, what are your general research interests and an expertise area?
Thank you, Ming. My general research focuses on digital consumption and marketing. And so that includes topics like influencers and how they engage their audiences. It includes topics like word of mouth and how it is that consumers go out and are able to navigate online reviews and figure out what it is that they can trust versus what they should avoid in an online marketplace. It includes topics like social media firestorms, and how is it that brands can create value around social media firestorms, and augmented reality, and what makes for kind of an engaging and valuable augmented reality experience. So it really spans a variety of digital topics that fit with both consumption and marketing interests.
Sounds very interesting. So now we're going to learn more about this particular article. So could you touch upon the highlight of this article and study?
Yeah, so the title of this article is Pay Attention Please, Person Branding and Online Attention Markets. And so it really focuses on how is it that people or influencers can break through and build their person brands in highly competitive attention markets. And so it's rooted in the idea that in the past, a lot of the person branding that we were doing was perhaps offline. And so if we look at the literature, those are the contexts that tended to be studied. How do academics build their brands, for example? But we know that people are spending a lot more time online on places like LinkedIn and Instagram and TikTok, and those become channels in which they can try to build their person brand. And so the findings really focus on the process through which individuals can do this. And so it's a three-step iterative process. And the first stage in this process is sort of understanding the audience a little bit better. What sort of audiences are best able to give attention so that someone can build their person brand? So it's audiences that are large. There are certain topics that attract more interest, that tie into people's identity. So for example, someone talking about a brand like Apple, there are a lot more people interested in a brand like Apple than are interested in maybe a smaller electronics brand. And similarly, there are topics that people have like an avid attraction to. It just triggers their emotions. Again, it's strongly tapped into their identity, and Apple would fit into that category as well. So people building their person brands look at these sorts of audiences. Where do they exist? They understand what sorts of things that they're interested in, and then they try to produce compelling content for those audiences. So that's sort of the second phase in the process. And so what is compelling content? There are a few sort of elements that play a role in creating compelling content. It includes things like providing advice. So talking about topics that are going to help people make decisions in their lives that are meaningful to their lives. It includes perhaps counterintuitive topics. So if we're talking about Apple, something that's counterintuitive might be suggesting that Apple should no longer produce their iPhone, right? Their largest product, and instead they should only focus on AR, VR devices because that's the future. And we've seen Apple do this before when they dropped the iPad and moved to the iPhone. And that would be something that would not be kind of a standard opinion, and therefore might attract more attention and attract more conversation as a result. We see people telling stories that are ongoing. We call them anti-narratives that never seem to have an end. And so when you're following a brand or creating content around a brand like Apple, for example, there's always going to be the next release. There's always going to be a new product coming out. There's always going to be speculation. And this is something that never ceases to stop. And you can see other stories that you could tell around your person brand. You know, if you're someone who vlogs on a daily basis, you're telling a story about yourself, and you know, there are going to be different events that happen. You're going to interact with different characters, but that story can go on almost infinitely. Sports teams are another example of this. You can always write about the next game or the next season, and that's a story that audiences can link into over time and become very interested about. And then another important aspect of creating compelling content for these audiences is the idea of distilling that. So it captures their attention in the first place. So whether or not that's titling it, creating hashtags, what are ways that we can draw people in and ensure that, you know, they understand that this content is compelling for them. So we're figuring out what are the best audiences to target, which ones are most able to give attention. We're creating content for them. They're giving that attention. And then what we want to do as people building person brands is we want to try to create kind of community and reinforce that engagement and encourage that engagement. And so that includes a variety of different tactics. It could be responding to comments if people are leaving comments, you know, on YouTube videos that you're producing. It could be encouraging people to like, share, and comment. It could be taking pieces of their comment and turning it into future content ideas so that they become part of that narrative and they feel like they're part of that community with you as a brand. And then that kind of loops back to the first phase again, this idea of what's sort of working and understanding what it is that audiences care about. So it's through this sort of cyclical process of identifying audiences that can give attention, giving them the content that they might be interested in, and kind of reinforcing the community element with those audiences and learning from that, that over time people can develop very compelling and engaging personal brand. So that tends to be the major theoretical takeaway from this particular article. And it also has implications. It obviously has implications for people interested in creating person brands online, which is a large number of individuals across a variety of different platforms. It also includes perhaps people managing platforms, because we know at the core of platforms is good content. And if they're better able to cater to the interests of people building brands and trying to monetize those brands on their platforms, they can kind of outcompete and keep the best content creators on their platforms. And that in turn is going to attract audiences that will bring in advertising dollars and keep those platforms very healthy.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, for sharing with us such extensive amount of information. As the host, I feel really honored to hear all the detailed explanation going on about this particular paper. So could you tell us, how did you come up with such interesting research idea?
That's a great question. I think there were two drivers of that. One was phenomenological and recognizing that there's been this tremendous growth of online platforms, and that's where we are spending more time. We're spending a lot of time obviously consuming content on platforms like Instagram, like TikTok, like LinkedIn, but we're also spending a lot of time kind of interacting and sharing content and building our person brand. So that was part of the story, that you can look out there into the world and see that this behavior is happening. And then the other part that drives this is looking at the person branding literature and recognizing that it tended to be a little bit slower in responding to this change in phenomenon, that we were thinking about context offline where people were building person brands, but not necessarily thinking about what are the new places and tools that individuals are using to try to build their brands.
And we are also curious regarding like what are some of the challenges, the research question being discussed in this article?
I think that the challenges of this research is anytime you work with online data, there is a lot of it. And so trying to filter through and look for patterns. And so that requires a lot of attention and a very deliberate approach, sticking to your research question and knowing what's relevant and knowing what's less relevant. But I think the larger challenge really is just once you get into the review process of trying to get it published, working with the review team, the editorship, to try to figure out what is the precise story and how can it be optimized and streamlined.
So Dr. Smith, in this particular article, we see that you used a very interesting ethnography approach and then a qualitative approach. Could you share with us the fun part about conducting this research?
Definitely. So this paper uses I would describe a multi-method qualitative approach. So it combines ethnography, which is the cultural study of online phenomenon and the individuals who are interacting there and creating culture, as well as in-depth interviews. And both of those methods I find inherently interesting. Ethnography allows you to look at people's interactions and what the values that they have and what they find meaningful in a very close way. And ideally, you're participating in that community as well. And in the context of this particular paper, I was involved in not only reading posts, but I was creating posts myself. I was commenting on posts. And so it's nice to get involved in the community. And then the other method was in-depth interviews, which is a method that I really enjoy personally because it provides you with an opportunity to meet people and interact with people who you otherwise would not have the chance to interact with. And so you get to learn about people and their interests and on a personal level, their background story, and all of that comes to inform the things that you're interested in your research questions. So what are the deeper things that are motivating them? What are the cultural factors that seem to play a role in what it is that they're doing and why they want to be building their personal brand. So the interviews here really provided a good sense for motivation and why people were doing what they're doing and building their personal brand. And then the ethnography allowed us to observe, okay, what are they actually doing? And what sort of fit do we see between, what they say they want to do and what they're motivated to do and what it is that they're actually doing there. So there's a really nice complement between using those two methods for this type of research question.
This is very interesting. And you basically have this quite immersive experience interacting with the community is such an interesting way to collect the information and then develop the paper. And then we're also curious, during when you are collecting all this information, have you encountered any hiccups or difficulties?
I don't know if I would describe in the papers there being particular hiccups or difficulties with a method that is immersive where you're engaged in the community. You're a member of the community, and so you have to act respectfully and within the norms of that community. And I think there's potential for things to go awry if you don't observe those norms and follow the customs that are standard there. And so part of ethnography is really getting to understand the community and what is acceptable there and what is valued and desired there. And so my goal is to stay within those bounds and try to truly understand the community as it is. And so I wouldn't say it's a hiccup, but I would say it's just something to be attentive to in the process of conducting that particular method.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to move into the future research direction and the implications of this article in the real business world. So since in this particular paper, you talk about personal branding, you talk about attention economy, audience engagement to reinforce the content creators to come up with more compelling, intriguing content. So in your opinion, what might you feel about the future direction of this particular research domain? And where do you think the field might be heading into?
I think this paper, mentioning those concepts that you brought up taps into a lot of contemporary online culture. And while we call this a person branding paper, that's the theoretical domain we're contributing to, I do think about it as being an influencer paper. And so that's where I see a lot of the future applications, because this is what content creators are trying to do as they strive to build influence and monetize that influence online. And so what are the biggest practical challenges that marketers have around influencers? Well, one of them is determining the effect of influence. And so from a quantitative standpoint, what is it that influencers are doing that helps to improve engagement or click-through rate or sales, does that vary across particular types of platform? And I think there's going to be a strong demand from the business community to better understand some of those issues as they invest more and more money in influencers who are building their person brands. And in that domain, which is very rich and quickly evolving, there's a lot to understand as well, right? So we're seeing the introduction of virtual influencers, and what does it mean to be a virtual influencer, and how does that impact how brands get built, and the risks maybe that they may not have to face, or introducing new risks that might be there. There are new platforms coming online, it seems, every few years. And so what does it mean to build a person brand on TikTok or on Clubhouse or any of these new platforms that are emerging, or Be Real, versus some of the more legacy platforms like a Facebook or a Twitter. And so I think those are all interesting and compelling issues, and how people build engagement, how do they kind of break through, because they're all very competitive, what we would call attention economies. There are a lot of people here who are competing for the attention of audiences, and audiences, we know, while spending a lot of time on social media, only have 24 hours in a day. And so if they're spending time consuming one influencer's content, they're not spending time on another influencer's content. And so that is a practical challenge of people engaging in person branding.
So definitely, and then also given the importance of the attention economy, as well as the social media marketing area being quite fragmented with so many interesting questions left in the world being unaddressed, do you plan to do any follow-up research on this particular related topic?
Definitely. I've got some research on influencers that is ongoing in a variety of different kind of areas. One of those papers is thinking about influencers in kind of the creator economy and what role they're playing there. And so we often think of influencers quite narrowly as people who act as spokespeople and create sponsored content. But if we take a step back and look at the range of things that they are doing, they're also acting as entrepreneurs. They're creating their own brands. They're selling products. They're also, in some domains, providing professional services as well. They're experts in their field, and social media and these platforms is another place where they can create that expertise or share that expertise and build potential, not only audiences, but build clients as well. And so thinking about influencers and how they monetize is one of the topics that I'm interested in looking at and currently studying. And then there are other topics related to how influencers are continuing to try to engage their audiences through the content that they create.
Thank you so much. And another question we want to ask is, to business professionals or managers, can you tell us the one thing that they should look out for in this space?
Relating to that last point, one of the things that businesses should be attuned to is the growing power of the influencers. And I know that it's something that gets mentioned frequently, but we can now think about influencers not only as spokespeople, but as people who are competitors, right? So they can be competitors both in the sense that if you're an advertiser and you're trying to get a message out there, well, there are also people creating content that might be more compelling that people want to pay attention to instead of, that paid promotion that you're producing. And if you're in the apparel space or in the cosmetic space, we have seen influencers launch brands that are competing with legacy brands. And so they're not only, a new and important kind of member of the media ecosystem, but markets more generally. They are transforming markets. We see that businesses are being built around them. So agencies that are supporting influencers and supporting their content creation, helping them get brand deals, helping them develop their own brands. And so it's dramatically changing a variety of different types of markets. And that's something that if you're in one of those markets, that you should be attuned to as well.
This is really great. Thank you, Dr. Smith. One last question in this future research direction and the managerial implication section is, we would like to learn more about how might social media influencer and social media marketing domain could benefit other discipline from your specific research work and your expertise?
This research on building your person brand is broadly applicable to a variety of different domains, because there are individuals who are seeking to enhance their reputation for personal or business reasons in a lot of different areas. And two come to mind. One is the area of entrepreneurship. And so an active part of entrepreneurship is going out and trying to acquire resources, and that means you need to be known, you need to have a good reputation. And so we see, the work that a lot of entrepreneurs do is not only the technical aspect of building the business, but it is the entrepreneur's face out front and their successes in doing that. And so I think it fits well with the idea of the micro entrepreneur and building these businesses. And then when we move to the other end of the spectrum, when we think about management and the role that in particular senior management play and being the faces for the corporations that they're in, people like CEOs, for example, they're very much interested in creating brands and building a reputation that is positive. And so this particular study looks at brand building in the context of online platforms. And these individuals, entrepreneurs and CEOs, are spending time in these platforms trying to build their brands the same way as influencers are. And so I think it's broadly applicable to those people in those roles and therefore those disciplines as well.
Thank you so much for the input. Now we are moving into the last section of this interview, particularly regarding sharing your insights, your experience to the colleagues, to peers who want to publish also in the prestigious journal articles. So the first question we have is, what made you choose to submit this work to the Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science?
We submitted the paper to JAMS because it does have a history of publishing papers on person branding. And if we look at the big 10 marketing journals, like JM or JMR, there really isn't the same history anywhere else. And so there are papers dating back from 2010, 2011 that were focused on person branding, and they're scattered in other places too. Like there are papers in JM that go back to 2005 and JMR in 2019, but sort of the most central part of that discussion is happening in JAMS. And so it seemed like a good place to submit. And I think it continues to carry on that conversation around person branding in that journal.
This is really great. Thank you, Dr. Smith. And then one last question, and I think that maybe this question, I'm speaking on behalf of many of the researchers, including myself. So what kind of insights or what advice or tips would you like to give and then share with the viewers, your peers, when they're also thinking about submitting their articles to the premier journals?
So humbly, I don't know if I'm the best person to give advice on this particular topic, but I think the general advice that you hear from editors is that they want to receive everyone's best work. And so that's best work in terms of most interesting research questions, the most novel data sets and theoretical positionings, and stories that kind of tie together and speak to conversations that are happening in those journals. And so it's sort of looking at those journals and trying to figure out, is the research that you have up to the standard, or does it have the potential to get up to that standard? Something you want to think about. And if you feel confident about that, you should submit. I mean, there's no harm in submitting, even if you feel like you're short of that, but you have to be willing to kind of put in the work and recognize that the review process might be a little more rigorous than what you would see at other sorts of journals, and recognizing that they also have really excellent reviewers. And so being kind of flexible and taking advantage of that kind of co-creative opportunity and working with really smart people to fine-tune your manuscript if you do have an opportunity to revise is something that makes a world of difference.
So thank you again so much for joining our interview. And then we wish you the best of luck in the research study moving forward. Thank you, Dr. Smith, for joining our on-ramp video recording.